It's Tuesday, impromptu live stream with Bruno Murari from Nikon, who brought some goodies today. So we got Nikon Z6iii in the flesh. I saw it first this morning. I had to really fight for it to get it out of people's hands. But we had a little in-store event, effectively, and it was just packed non-stop. So I literally had to ask Bruno at about like 2 o'clock, say, Bruno, can we do a quick live stream? And he said, yes. So we decided to do this. So the questions, what I want to hear from you is the questions about the camera. So if you have any questions, something that maybe you haven't seen already talked about on YouTube or something, or any other places, do ask us in the comments below. It's QQQ, put it in front, leave it in the live chat. I'm going to check my Instagrams as well. You can drop me a message there, but I think live chat is where it's at. Bruno, tell us a bit about yourself. What do you do? Etc. etc.
Right, so my name is Bruno. I basically split my time half with Nikon, running all the in-store events, doing a little bit of the video work for Nikon as well. But on the side, I'm also a creative freelance director. So I do music videos, documentaries, commercials, all things video, basically.
So what cameras do you use for video work?
So I've got technically, I've got 2 Nikon cameras. I mean, I've got a Nikon Z6iii and a red Komodo as well, which I suppose is now technically a red Nikon camera as well.
I knew the answer, but I had to ask this again because we have a red specialist here. So we're not going to talk about video that much because I know you guys really look into still features of this camera. But if you have any video questions, please do, because you literally have the right person who knows those cameras ins and out. One of the questions from the chat, I think Nick came up with a question. I've been out of the loop. Tell me a quick difference between Z8 and Z6 Mark III. So first, obviously, price and resolution, but what other aspects we need to look at? Did something change in between the releases of 2 cameras?
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting to note as well, is obviously the Z6 Mark III is lower down in the range, but Nikon has really thrown the kitchen sink into this camera. Pretty much every single feature that they were able to introduce with the Z6iii, they have essentially, haven't really cut any corners. But the main difference between the Z8 and the Z6iii is the sensor. So on the Z8, you've got a fully stacked 45 megapixel sensor, whereas on the Z6iii, we've introduced with something which is brand new, which is called a partially stacked sensor. Effectively meaning that it's stacked on the top and bottom, which gives you close to a stacked sensor performance, but for a much lower price. And that is the standout feature between the 2. Okay,
and then like there's a lot of video features that came in. I know that the EVF is pretty much the brightest EVF.
EVF is bonkers.
Honestly, if you ramp up all the brightness inside the EVF, you're just going to burn your retinas. That's how bright it is. It's pretty good. Don't try it at home.
Yeah, but need some sunglasses for that.
Exactly, but like, did the video features change? Obviously, Z8 does 8K RAW. This one does 6K RAW at 40 bit. It does NRAW, which you can use DaVinci Resolve software, even free version for that. I think it's only exporting 4K in a regular version. Then if you get a paid one, you can export at 6K. But you also have ProRes, and ProRes is very useful when you are handling, basically giving those files that you've just filmed to someone else to work on. It's just much less hassles. Anything else have changed?
Yes, so we've actually got a few extra video features that you don't find on the Z8. Like, for example, in ProRes, you're quite limited on the Z8 to 4K resolution. But now you can actually go all the way up to 6K in ProRes. So before on the Z8, if you wanted 8K and all of those resolutions, you'd need to use NRAW, you know, for 8K 60, I mean. You'd have to use NRAW, whereas now you can easily go to 6K with ProRes, ProRes HQ, and ProRes RAW. Which is, I believe ProRes RAW is 5.4K instead of 6K.
There's got this YUV, which was a color space or something like this.
Which is really nice. Again, industry standard for a lot of productions, which is really nice.
He knows, he's a videographer. You know, it all sounds Chinese to me right now. The videography is the language I don't speak, but let's skip all the video side of things. I know you guys are interested in stills photography. So this camera can process a lot of data really, really fast. And I thought that 240 frames per second, that was in DX mode, and you told me it's full frame.
Yeah, it's 120 frames 4K. That's a DX crop.
Okay, I'm with you. This is 1080p at 240K, but you can still do this, and obviously you can do slow-mo. Again, back from video to stills. One question on pre-capture, so that's still in JPEG.
Still JPEG, 120 frames.
But it will perform the same way as Z8 and Z9.
Identical.
Okay, that's no different. So that's good. Let's have a look at your questions. Paul P is asking, is the MBN14 as bulky as the one for Nikon Z8? Does it take NL18 batteries?
No. No, so you can't get 18 batteries in it. It's very similar to the battery grip found on the Z6 and Z7 Mark II.
Okay. It also works as a USB charger. So effectively, it's got USB-C. You can plug it into a charger with a proper voltage output, so then it can charge the batteries inside the camera. And it's old-fashioned kind of D200 style, where the bit goes inside the grip. So you have to remove the battery, remove the battery and the door, and then put the whole thing on. So another question. So Robin Hepburn, who helped us with the audio in this setup, so hopefully the audio is good. He is asking, to what extent does Z6iii give better low-light performance than the Z8 and Z9? So 24 megapixels versus 45 megapixels, and this is a new 24 megapixel sensor.
Okay,
so you had this camera probably for 20 years. Tell us the low light performance.
It's actually crazy, because I was downstairs showing a customer, and I like to play a little game when I show people the camera. Is that I take a photo at 64,000 ISO, and then I get them to guess what ISO it is. And then most people will say something like, oh yes, 2,000, 3,000 ISO, but no, I had the thing at full 64,000. So I think hopefully that answers your question, is you can absolutely get, usable images at 50,000 ISO, 40,000 ISO. I don't recommend it, but you absolutely can get usable images. If I had to shoot professionally, shooting a concert in low light, I would quite happily shoot 8,000 ISO, and where I might not be, you do the same thing with a Z8 or Z9.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I'd recommend you to watch is the video on YouTube by Gerald Andan. He normally covers the video features of the cameras, but he also tests things for like dynamic range and noise. And what's interesting to me from his video is that the 6400 ISO was cleaner than 5000 ISO. I assume it's to do with some native ISO, what they do.
So it's a dual gain ISO.
Dual gain. So what's the native ISOs for those?
I believe it's 800 and 5,000, but it could have changed for the Z6iii. I have to check on that.
I think that's probably 64 because it did look clear.
Exactly.
I want to thank Vince, who said thanks for today. You both definitely deserve a coffee. Question, I forgot to check. Does it have the manual focus helper for the ZF? So I assume it's focus peaking or rangefinder?
Oh, no, he's probably talking about the eye tracking in manual focus.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yes. That's all the same for now.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jay Blue, as well, for coffee funds. Let's see. Michael Brown is asking, what is the quality of the still image like compared to Z6 and Z6 Generation 2 cameras?
I'd probably say very, very close. Almost no different. The one thing to bear in mind is that with the X-Speed 7 processor, any noise that you see gets processed, and I think it looks nicer. The noise, so that's where you'd see the biggest differences in terms of low light. But if you're purely talking about stills, dynamic range in raw files, you won't see much of a difference.
But let's say people who have Z6 and Z6 II now, what are the main things that like what would you recommend them to look into when upgrading? So I assume the autofocus is going to be a huge jump.
Big jump.
What else are we going to see the difference? I assume is low light. So low light,
but autofocus.
Autofocus, so,
you can find the subject's eye in -10 EV, which is absolutely phenomenal. So even if you're not, doing 20 frames a second shooting, you're still able to shoot single shots at, -10 EV in pretty much dark situations. So it is very, very nice for focusing in low light. But there's also a lot more. I mean, the biggest change on the body is the flip screen. So if that's important for you, then that's a really, really nice, a really big, nice change as well. Coming from a Z6 II, for example.
It's a higher resolution screen as well.
It's a higher resolution screen. The viewfinder is crazy. 4,000 nits, that's unheard of. It's the type of thing that you have to look at it for yourself. When you do get the opportunity to look at it, go on the menu, turn up the viewfinder brightness all the way. Just prepare some sunglasses before you do that. But it is something that you really, really have to have a look through for yourself.
So that's the best AVF effectively in all Nikon cameras right now.
Absolutely, because it has still the 120 frames refresh rate from the Z8 and Z9. Plus, it's got the 4,000 nits and the 5.7 million dot. Screen. And
then you get the frame rate as well on top of this. So if you're a sports wildlife guy, you basically get all the latest frame rates as well as basically autofocus.
Yeah, one thing to note is when you are comparing it to other cameras is when you use this in mechanical shutter mode, it will feel very much like a Z6 II in terms of how far it's shooting and the response of the camera. But when you put this in electronic shutter mode, you do get a much similar experience compared to a Z9. right? So you get the blackout-free shooting in electronic shutter, essentially.
Yeah, there's no jello effect as well for video. It's one of the shortest, basically, response time, which is, I think, according to Gerald Van Dam, was about 9 milliseconds, which on normal cameras is about 20 plus. So that's huge if you film in moving subjects, but also if you use electronic shutter, that will help you for still images as well. All right, so let's see. There's another interesting question on the image quality, and basically that's to do with okay, what's the image quality like if you pull the JPEGs out of the video? That's a very specific question. Have you tried anything like this?
No, it depends on what frame rates you're recording. I mean, whatever frame rate you're recording, that will be the size of the still, essentially. So, the higher the image quality, the better quality stills. If it's a 10-bit file, it will still be an 8-bit image because it's effectively you're getting a screenshot of that picture. So you don't really have any sort of raw capabilities, but you can, absolutely. You just have more detail as you go up in terms of resolution.
And people are worried about firmware updates for Z6 II. Are we still going to see some?
It's difficult to say. I mean, Nikon has been known to throw out firmware for older cameras when nobody saw it coming. I think, a couple of years ago, we still had firmwares for the D70-100. So it's definitely possible. We can't really comment on whether these things are going to come out and when they're going to come out, but I wouldn't discount it.
Yeah, I mean, we saw quite a few firmware updates for the older cameras, even for some Coolpixels that came out in 2024. So I assume Nikon will release them. I think a lot of people think about that Z6 II will get this miraculous autofocus firmware update, which Nikon rumors started about 2 years ago. And I think the answer is probably not. I think the autofocus is as good as it gets on this camera. And if you want to see an update on this, have a look at Generation 3 cameras like Z6iii in particular. But you obviously have Nikon ZF, which is slightly below price-wise than this Z6iii, but also you got Z8 and Z9
one thing to bear in mind as well with firmware upgrades is the XPEED 7 is 10 times faster than the XPEED 6. Even if you have two XPEED 6 processors, the XPEED 7 is still 5 times faster, and coding for multi-processors is more difficult than for single processors. So, Nikon will do as much as they can, but there is certainly a hardware limit to what they can achieve with those cameras.
Yeah, think about this. And we now use full AF area compared to DSLRs. We would use this effectively the small frame in the sensor. We processing the whole area. We now have things like face recognition, animal recognition, vehicle, you name it. So camera has to process a lot of data at a very high frame rate, effectively, whatever refresh rate is, of the EVF. So there's a lot of data to process, and that's the difference of the new processor compared to the old one. Okay, so Eric is asking, given the Z6iii 24 megapixel camera, does this mean that 24 megapixel is a preferred sensor size for new cameras rather than 45 megapixels?
I think there's different tools for different jobs. I know a lot of press photographers who, if they could have a say in camera manufacturing, they would probably do 16 megapixel JPEGs because that's all they need. But then you have landscape photographers who take 100 megapixels if Nikon can give it. So I think it's really nice that we have different options in the range. I think 24 is a really nice balance between low light capabilities and still giving you enough to crop. And then you have 45 megapixels if you still want a little bit more. One thing I can say is Nikon is prioritizing sensor readout speed over resolution. So you might have noticed that the Z8 and Z9 have the fastest scanning rolling shutters on the market. And now we've got the Z6iii with the only kind of partially stacked sensor. So Nikon is prioritizing scan speed over resolution. We could have done a much higher resolution sensor, but with a slower readout speed. And I don't think that's what Nikon's trying to do here.
Yeah, and it's a hybrid video camera, effectively. And I know you don't like video, but the video that brings all the advancements for still. So keep that in mind. Always keep that in mind. Even if you don't shoot video, if you're just a stills photographer, because you have video, that's where you get all the goodies that come with it, that transfers into stills. And we get all this, as Jordan Dan said, it's basically the best video camera under $2.5 grand. And that's all done before the Red Tech came in.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen next? Are you excited? I mean,
absolutely. I'm a Nikon and Red user. It's actually funny because I bought the Red Komodo about 2 weeks before the announcement, which is an amazing thing.
You can get a Nikon discount if you wait just for 2 weeks. But that's all exciting. Let's see. Ian Knox is asking, what does the battery life compare to, let's say, previous generation cameras like Z6 and Z2? Is it better? Is it not?
I'd probably say, incredibly enough, I think it's very similar. I mean, XPEED 7 is a very efficient processor. The 4000 net viewfinder, if you leave it on auto mode, it will be very efficient in handling power. Effectively, from my experience, is about the same as a Z6 II. It's no different. I've had it for a few weeks and I can comfortably get about 1,500 shots out of it.
That's pretty good. Is the camera slightly better compared to Gen 2 models?
Oh,
That's
yeah,
the question
it's quite a lot better. It's quite a lot better. The thing immediately, in terms of battery power or just...
Sorry, is the camera bigger? I'm sorry.
Bigger, right.
I'm reading 20 comments at the same time, and I don't even hear what I'm saying.
It's better, right?
Yeah, camera is better.
Yes, but
everyone should have one.
Absolutely. But yes, it is a little bit bigger. So I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's a little bit thicker and a little bit longer, and it weighs a little bit more as well. Not much. So if you're used to a Gen 2 body, you probably won't feel it. But if you have a slightly larger hand, you might actually find this a little bit more comfortable. Your pinky would just sit right in there.
We always talk about this curious case of hanging pinky, and I think with this case, that's been solved. The grip is slightly deeper as well. What I can tell you that it's a very small change in terms of size, because when I saw the presentation before the announcement, it did look like it sits right in the middle between Z6 and Z8. So someone's Photoshop skills, they exaggerate a little bit, but it's actually just tiny bit bigger. But because of the thickness of the camera, it does feel a lot more comfortable in the hand.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see. Mookie MC is asking, other than EVF, are there any other specifications of Z6iii that exceed Z8 and Z9?
I'd probably say audio. So
Audio
it's got line-in audio,
yeah.
which is really exciting, simply because you can attach an external recorder, have an XLR input into that, and you get much better audio quality than you could previously. So that's really exciting that we don't really get on the Z8 and Z9. The 240 frames slow motion is something that you don't get on the Z8 and Z9. And you get that 10-bit N-Log as well, which is great. You also get the extra ProRes options for video. And you get the flip out screen, which you don't get on the Z8 as well. So those are probably the main differences that you get on here that you don't get on the Z8.
Yeah, so this is Z8 screen. So Z6iii is more like a ZF type of screen, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a completely articulating screen, so you can see it there.
Let's see. I'm going to try to see if you can switch the camera a little bit, see if I can do anything here. But just to show you a little close up, we don't have anything set up, so just bear with me. Let's see if I can make it work. And it's a demo camera, so 1,000 people used it and changed the settings on it. So it may work, it may not. We're going to find out, and we're just going to show you the camera in just kind of in a close-up view. So let's see if it works or not. Thank you very much, David Liu. He said, hoping for firmware that gives us half a frame mode. I'm all for it. I mean, yeah, as someone pointed out, Jay wrote Photo Art. He said that the price tag is also very different. I wouldn't expect Z6iii to be significantly better than Z8 and Z9 based on the price tag, but it did work before. Here we go. So that's that. So we got the camera up, the camera here. So it's a little bit thicker compared to Nikon Z6 II. So let's have a look at the flippy screen. So this is the flippy screen. So that's what it is. So it's very kind of Nikon ZF style. It is a higher resolution, though. It does feel bigger than Nikon ZF. By the way, a lot of customers brought in their ZFs today. We had them in all shades, all the colors available from Nikon. So there's a big love for Nikon ZF cameras. But if you're a professional shooter and you need a video functionality and you do commercial gig all the time, I think Z6iii is definitely a better choice for this. And just to have this, regular modern controls, quite useful, I would say. All right, back to the full frame. Let's see if you have more questions in the chat. Well, I'll ask this question later on, but there is a concern of what's going to happen to Nikon Z7 III. Is it in the books? And obviously, I know you're not going to answer this question, but what are your general thoughts on this? Does kind of Z7 III has place in Nikon lineup, or we kind of getting away from it and kind of...
I think potentially in the future there could be a Z7 III. I don't think it's anything in the direct pipeline. I mean, Nikon traditionally has announced Z6 and Z7 together at the same time as the same body. The fact that they haven't done it sort of says a lot, that we don't have that currently. Could it happen in the future? Possibly, not anything that I would know. You could have potentially space for a Z7 in the lineup, but I think what Nikon is trying to prioritize is hybrid cameras. You know, you look at the Z8, fast readout, you know, we're not going over to 60, 70, 80 megapixels. We're retaining 45, but just doing that very, very quickly. Same thing with the Z6iii, you know, keep it 24, but just make the readout really fast.
So do you think there's a place for a slower, high resolution camera, a camera which is basically slow, it doesn't perform as well as those, it's not as fast?
Potentially. I think if there's the demand, Nikon will definitely come out with something like that. But I think they're definitely prioritizing fast readout sensors in, you know, 45 and 24 megapixels, which is sort of the Goldilocks resolution for high and low res. We could see it in the future, but it's not something that I'd be aware of now.
All right, there's a question about WRB10 remote trigger for SB5000, if it's going to work with those cameras.
Yeah. So all the previous triggers and accessories would work just fine.
So that would work as well. Fantastic. Does dynamic range improve with more megapixels, or can 24 megapixels Z6iii compete with 45 megapixels of Z8 and Z9 cameras?
It's not necessarily tied to megapixels, it's how you tune the sensors. So the sensors of the Z6 traditionally since the Mark I have always been tuned for sort of higher ISOs, and the sensors of the Z7 and Z8 are always tuned for lower ISO. So it's not necessarily tied to the number of megapixels you've got. It's just as it happens on Nikon cameras, they tune the 7s and 8s for lower resolution, so for lower ISO, and the Z6 for higher ISO. So if you're comparing 100 ISO on the Z6iii versus 64 on the Z8 would probably have more dynamic range.
Fantastic. We've got about 7 minutes left till the end of this live stream. So if you have more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will try to answer as many as you can. We're going to have a live stream on Friday as usual with a special guest. Her name is Becky. You may have met her before. She's the person who spent probably 3 years with this channel with me and does occasionally video with me. So she's going to be coming here live, not just cardboard. So do join us this Friday. But coming back to the questions. So let's have a look. So you have obviously pre-production camera. Will there be any changes to production module?
Shouldn't be. I'm told that this is final firmware. It's just in a pre-production body.
The camera starts to ship on 25th of June. That is next Tuesday, so in a week's time. If you would like to get your camera on day one, and if you're in UK, get in touch with Grace Westminster, speak to our chap sales, and tell them that you want the camera and maybe pre-order one. Who knows? So let's have a look. J-Rod Photo Art is asking, does Nikon pay attention to YouTube channels and what they say about Nikon? I mean, that would be probably cancelled.
Yeah.
I
mean, I think Nikon is definitely keeping an eye on YouTube, and I think it's a big media. It reaches a lot of people. I think they're definitely starting to work with more and more influencers and YouTubers. So, yeah, I mean, definitely it's something that Nikon do pay attention to. There's obviously got to be a limit on what Nikon pay attention to, because it's not only the YouTuber crowd that Nikon cater for. They have a large variety of customers, but it's definitely an important segment.
Are any particular features that you like in this camera? Let's say, I know you have Z8, right?
Yeah.
So like, is there any features that you think would be really useful for your type of work?
Oh, for me, the 240p slow motion. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I love slow motion.
So effectively that works. You record in 240 frames per second at a normal speed. And then in the software, you basically slow down to 10 times, which is 24 frames per second. Can you do it within here too when you preview?
No, you can't do it in camera. Not yet. I mean, it's something that definitely could come in firmware updates. I mean, I'll give you an example. So the Z8, when it first came out, gave you 120 frames, but it didn't give you the option to slow it down in camera. That's been added in firmware. So it's something that's definitely possible to do later, but as of now, it doesn't have that function. It just records all of the frames, and then you can slow it down 10 times after. But I'm really happy to say it does that in 10-bit N-Log as well, which is excellent.
Yeah, I mean, all this recording happens internally as well, which is incredible. Back in the day, you would have to buy something like Ninja 5, an expensive SSD drive, and it's going to take so much space on your hard drive and all this. Now, N-RAW is fairly compact raw codec, in my opinion. And ProRes is not too big as well.
Yeah, ProRes is great. I mean, I love that it can do ProRes 6K internally, which is something the Z9 and Z8 can't do. So it's definitely a really, really good step forward.
People asking about production levels. I was told that the stock is going to be quite good. So the reason why camera, it was announced yesterday, the shipment is next Tuesday. So that means obviously Nikon will manufacturing already some units, so they will be ready to go. But from what we were told, there's not going to be, let's say, like people won't be waiting for months like they waited for their Z9s and Z8 cameras. So that should be a little bit better. In news on 35 1.2 lens, that's been on Nikon roadmap for quite some time now.
Yeah, it's definitely something that was around. I mean, it definitely was in the roadmap, but we've not really heard any news regarding when that will come out, if that will come out.
How good is it? Just tell us. How good is it? Is it worth the wait?
I haven't used them.
All right. Tomorrow we're going to have Richard on the chat. I'm going to ask the same question. No, we're not going to have Richard tomorrow. People are exciting. So yeah, there's talk of Nikon obviously building factories in Japan, which is quite nice. Nick Harrison's asking, is autofocus of Z6iii is the same as Z8 and Z9?
I think it's within 10% from my test. I mean, I've had it for a few weeks, tested it alongside the Z9 and Z8, and I couldn't find a huge jump. It was definitely within 10% of focusing. In lower light, it's about the same, possibly better as you go really, really dark. In normal daylight conditions, probably about 10% slower than the Z8, if that. They're very, very, very close, especially when you use the electronic shutter at 20 frames a second. I could barely tell a difference.
Yeah, but people also, there was a question about Nikon ZF, and I can tell you that autofocus of Z6iii is snappier than ZF, but ZF is really good as well. So, like, again, look at the cameras in the Nikon lineup. So ZF sits kind of slightly below. It's like above Z6 II, but below Z6iii. If you like retro style cameras, you know, with autofocus or not, ZF autofocus is definitely new generation autofocus. So it's definitely better than Gen 2 cameras. Again, there's obviously a lot of people want their pre-capture in RAW. Do you think with the processes like this, we hopefully will get the RAW pre-capture soon?
Possibly. I mean, it's definitely something that Nikon's aware of. I mean, even I've fed that back personally. That it definitely could come in firmware. Whether it does or not, we'll see what happens. But if there's a demand, and I think there is, Nikon will probably look into doing it in firmware. The thing with firmware is they have a list of priorities. Mm-hmm. How high it is on that list of priorities, we don't know. So we'll find out.
That's true. I was asking about pixel shift. Do they have pixel shift in camera? It's built in. Yeah,
it's not built in, so it doesn't create the files in. It's the same as the ZF. Yeah,
it's the ZF. So it's already. You don't need a firmware upgrade. It's just already there. The option is there. Exactly. I assume the RAW, the VR functionality is very similar design as Nikon ZF. Mm-hmm. It's a new type of design.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an 8-stop. In-body stabilization,
and you got the point VI as well. Yeah,
exactly, which is really nice, especially when you've got the subject's eye in the very corner. It is much more effective than previous cameras.
Yeah, I was asking about recording video on 2 cars simultaneously. How many cameras do that like available currently? Just think how much data this has to process, especially if you're looking at 6K and RAW at 60 frames per second. That's a lot of data. So you really need to have much faster process to do this, but this already 10 times faster than the previous generation. So Abby, I think for £2,500, you probably won't see any camera that would do that, or maybe it's going to be 1 or 2. But
even if you see the camera that would have that functionality don't have the codecs that this does. So, you know, you wouldn't be able to do it realistically, 2 streams of 6K RAW to 2 different cards. And also the SD card wouldn't be able to handle it. So
the image quality suffers basically. If you want to have 2 streams, you have to basically use something very compact.
Of course, you have to do it low. You have to do it 1080p or 4K. The problem is if your second slot is an SD card, and you're trying to do 2 streams of 6K RAW, it's just not going to work on the second card. What it does do is, which a lot of people may not be aware of, is any time that you record NRAW, you automatically get a proxy 1080p file at the same time. So every time you press record, you get 2 clips, one NRAW and one sort of 8-bit 1080p file, which acts as your proxy.
So what proxies do, and if you use the DaVinci Resolve software, proxy allows you to work with those files without actually using the full power of your computer to process the whole 4K or 6K resolution. So it's much faster to work with those and do a quick edit before you actually render the files. So is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, exactly.
I've learned something last week, so I'm just sharing with you. I'm pretending I know my things, but not. Okay, so a lot of people also kind of, like, I spoke to one chap today, and he had Z9 and he was looking at Z6iii. So, and a couple of days ago, someone asked me, why would people who have Z8 and Z9 would upgrade to this one? Well, because it's much smaller. So again, those people won't replace their camera, but they would look maybe at a smaller camera, something they would take with them on holidays, or for something, let's say, non-crucial type of basically applications. Maybe for wildlife, somewhere in the North Pole, you're going to get your Z9, but for occasional stroll in the park, this is much lighter package. We hit 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think
Time flies when you're having fun.
Exactly. So I'm gonna keep this camera. Bruno just kindly gifts it to me, so he didn't. But thanks.
Pry it away from your hands.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're gonna have a live stream on Friday, so hopefully maybe ask us more questions. Maybe we'll be able to answer it. But Becky's gonna be here. Thanks so much, Bruno. It's been a blast.
Absolute pleasure.
We really enjoy having you here, and obviously a lot of people came in and say hi to you and also to me today. I was really surprised. People say, "Oh, come on, we saw you on the telly." I'm like,
celebrity, got people taking pictures of you.
Celebrity, yeah. But thank you everyone for joining us. And again, we will see you in 3 days. I hope you had fun as much as we did. So we will see you soon. Bye bye.